This is the January 22nd, 2020 SIG Cloud Provider meeting. My name is Walter Fender. I go by Chef Taco. I'm one of the SIG chairs and I'll be leading the meeting. I see a lot of attendees, so I think it would be good to just go around and do a round of introductions. Laszlo, if you could introduce yourself. Okay, not getting anything. Steve?
Steve Wong, I'm software engineer for VMware working on Kubernetes open source.
Craig?
Hi, I'm a PM at Microsoft. I work on lots of open source stuff, including our cloud provider for Kubernetes.
Thank you. Richard?
Yeah, Richard Tice, software engineer at IBM, working on the managed service and our cloud provider for IBM.
Andrew?
Hi, Andrew, one of the co-chairs. Walter, I work at VMware.
Jeremy?
Yeah, Jeremy Morris, go by Morris Law. I'm software engineer at DigitalOcean, and I also work on Kubernetes.
Sadev?
Yep. Hi, everyone. This is Sadev Zala at IBM, open source developer, and I co-lead the IBM cloud provider.
David?
Well, hi, David Von Benen, software engineer at VMware.
Kendall?
Hi, I'm Kendall Nelson. I work at the OpenStack Foundation as an upstream developer advocate. So I'm kind of the go-between between the Kubernetes community, the OpenStack cloud provider, and the OpenStack community.
Awesome. Eric?
Yeah, I'm a software engineer at Rally Health and currently working on contributing to the AWS provider.
Yassine?
Hey, Yassine Tijani. I'm software engineer at VMware and I work on Kubernetes.
Rob?
Hi, I'm Rob Heltz. I'm a software engineer at ZipRecruiter, and I'm just here because I'm curious how this SIG is run.
Awesome. Welcome. Nick?
I'm a software engineer at AWS on the EKS team, and I work on internal and Kubernetes.
Fabio?
Hey, my name is Fabio. I work at VMware, software engineer, work in Kubernetes and all things around it as well.
Laszlo?
Hello, this is Laszlo Jansi from IBM, Kubernetes Service software engineer. I'm here just to look around. Thank you.
Awesome, welcome. So, did I miss anyone? All right. If we've got
Steven?
I think so. Steve?
Yeah, I introduced myself.
Oh, sorry, I'm losing it. Sorry.
It's all good, Andrew. Thanks for keeping me honest. All right. Time for sub-projects. I didn't think I heard anyone from Alibaba, so AWS? Do we have any updates, Nick?
No updates on AWS, just extraction.
Awesome. Okay. You guys pretty much on schedule, and actually, if I could just check on, when would you expect to have a sort of a working out of tree alpha?
Our biggest stuff is documentation and testing. I think we're aiming for, along with the 1.18 release, to have a alpha version that we publish.
Awesome. Sounds good. Azure?
Pretty much the same story. 118 is our target. We've got almost everything. All the blocking issues are well underway, and we'll be ready for people to start using it and giving us feedback with 118.
Awesome. Sounds good. GCP, yeah, ditto. We're aiming for the 118 release, and yeah, I mean, right now we have a build for out of tree. Right now, I'm working on, or no, alpha there. Don't jump the gun on me, Andrew. So alpha for 118, and hoping to get something that we can actually fully bring up and have all the tests pass. OpenStack. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped one. I apologize. IBM.
Yeah, this is Richard. We're looking at GA in our Audit Tree Cloud Provider with the CCM in 117 of our managed service. And then just a few updates on our provider meeting updates. We're going to move to monthly meetings on that.
Sounds good.
Did you have anything else?
Do you guys have for a non-managed, do you have an out of tree offering?
No, that's the thing. I think that's one of our next steps too, to move that. Yep.
Okay, and do you have like an alpha in 118 or anything similar planned?
I would say probably that would be our best bet, 118 alpha for that.
Okay. It's a somewhat aggressive goal, but just so you're aware, Andrew and I and the storage team have been aiming for being everything out of tree in the 121 release.
Okay, sounds good.
And that's primarily for the open source. So just so you're on, you know, if you see anything that's going to cause problems with that, please let us know. OpenStack. Okay, doesn't sound like we have anyone for OpenStack. vSphere.
I'm not sure if somebody else gave an update on this when I was out, but we have a new 1.1 release for Audit Tree. Right now, we're definitely this is our recommended, is a recommended cloud provider right now for vSphere. So if you're running 6.7 U3 or newer, right now we're recommending Audit Tree. So we're fully on the GA stable path for that. So
that was going to be my next question. Awesome, great news. Thank you.
And I love the aggressive timeline for the removal as well.
No, but that's great news. Thank you. All right. So we are, I believe, a week away from the kept deadline for 118. So I think that is most of the extraction migration focus. So Andrew, I think you were doing the CCM migration cap.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just an FYI. Yesterday, I opened the PR that adds a bit more of the implementation details, and it goes through. So the API was what you initially proposed in your POC, Walter. So this just takes that API and then kind of talks about like how we're going to inject the config into the components, and it does a walkthrough of what the migration would look like. And so I think we're just blocked on like someone from API machinery to review this.
I can make
I just
that
wanted
happen.
to kind of put it on everyone's radar.
No, yeah,
Okay.
please.
Maybe we should do like an initial pass of the SIG.
Yeah, absolutely. So if everyone could please try to get to this by, what should we say, end of day tomorrow?
Yeah, and just to be clear, like this cap is not for the average migration path. This is for like very large scale clusters that have very strict requirements on availability. Like this is the proposed
no downtime
mechanism.
solution.
Yeah, like we're talking like zero downtime, then use this. But for most cases and for most clusters that can tolerate, you know, a few minutes of downtime during upgrade, then we're recommending just like flipping your cluster over to disable the cloud providers and then just deploying the CCM on top, which is probably the more easiest, simplest way to do it.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, definitely, if you can get away with just take your control plane down, upgrade it, with to have the CCM and be completely configured and then bring it up again, that is a much simpler solution. Yeah, this is definitely for people with HA clusters that don't want any downtime. All right.
Yep.
You're flipping. All right. Sorry about that. All right. Nick, I think you were doing credential provider extraction.
Yeah, so I published another revision of it that incorporated the feedback that I got from SIG Auth and SIG Node. So I think we need more eyes from cloud provider for sure, but
Okay.
I think it's getting there wasn't any I guess like critical disagreements or anything like that. I think people seem to think that it's going in the right direction.
Awesome. That's really good news. I talked to Tim St. Alclair about looking at this last week. Do you know if you got his eyes on it?
Yep, he gave me a few comments. I think I've addressed most of them so far. I just have like one or two more, but yeah, we're getting close.
Okay, awesome. I mean, nothing changed there, but the network proxy SSH removal cap is already, the beta requirements have already been set for, actually for 117, although we didn't get all the changes made. And I've got a couple of engineers right now working on trying to get that all done for 118. So I think we're in pretty good shape on that front.
For the credential provider, Kep, Craig, do you know if there's someone on the Azure side we can get to review this, because this is going to affect the Azure credential provider as well, and I don't think we have a point person for that.
Yeah, I just added the comment to one of our issues to review that. I will get Peng Fei to pay attention to it.
Yeah, please do. And again, we're trying, just the timelines are a bit of a crunch right now. So we really need to land this cap next week. So the sooner you guys can give us feedback and we can incorporate it, the better. So definitely, please take a look at that. Thank you, Andrew.
Got it.
Awesome. Does anyone else have anything else they're aware of that needs to be taken care of for extraction or migration? Sounds like not. All right. Agenda. I've been doing a lot of talking. Andrew, did you want to chat about the 121 target?
Yeah, I mean, Walter said before, just an FYI, that between the SIG leads of this SIG and storage, we have like a tentative date for 1.21. And this was largely based on like several releases after CSI migration went beta. And so that's the release we're targeting where we're actually going to remove the cloud provider integration. So just kind of making it a little bit more official here. And then is there any questions on that, or do we need to? Are there strong objections?
So before we go ahead.
Not a strong objection, the opposite, but like I'm fully in agreement with the aggressive timeline. But my question is around storage providers. Is there like a concert effort in creating CSI providers for all the missing out-of-tree cloud provider? Is this coordinating in some way?
Yeah, we're coordinating with SIG Storage, so SOD and crew. I mean, again, we're trying to transmit. We're not saying it's going to happen, but it's certainly, it is our goal right now. We have learned from previous experience that if we don't set a goal like this, things don't happen.
Oh, absolutely. I just want to make sure, that we get to 121 with, at least the CSI plugins, in line. So we have, there's actually a transition path. Sometimes I'm worried about like blinders, right? People working on just something and not considering the other impact.
Yeah.
I
So the
completely agree. I
expectation-
mean, I
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, so I was just saying, like, the expectation is that by now everyone has a CSI plugin. Maybe it's not like GA, but it's being developed. The only thing that's kind of a question mark is like whether you have CSI migration developed, which is why like 118 signifies the CSI migration mechanism is beta, which means that the only thing we're waiting for is the providers to implement the migration mechanism. And if they don't implement it, that just means if you want to use like version 1.22 or 21, you can't like upgrade from an existing cluster.
Yeah. So the other comment I will make to that is, I mean, Andrew and I worked closely with the storage team on the migration plan on coordinating the timing, but we've been mostly letting them take care of pushing the actual CSI drivers. We are, however, sort of championing in every chance we get since we have good reach into all of the entry providers. We have an audience here right now that, hey, please check that the CSI drivers that your cloud provider needs are being taken care of. You know, and so thank you for bringing it up. Yeah, please, you know, Google, Amazon, Azure, you know, VMware, vSphere, whichever, please make sure that you guys have a plan. The other thing I will talk at is if you're wondering why we pick 121 and why we say that's aggressive, for us to remove in 121, we have to GA in 120, which means we need to beta in 119, which means we need to have everything successfully alphaed in 118. So, I mean, we're basically looking at successfully having everything hit its, you know, its appropriate status in each of the next 4 releases. So, something to think about. Does anyone have any other questions about the 121 target? Okay. Andrew, demo?
Yeah. Okay, so the folks at Azure, mainly Pengfei, opened the CAP a little while back, which was to do instance level node registration that's also out of tree. And so the main motivation is that if you follow the CCM model to do node registration, you have to make a Cloud API endpoint call multiple times for every node that's registered. And for certain cloud providers that are very quota sensitive, it's a lot of quota pretty much. And so there was a proposal to pretty much extract the node part of the CCM into a daemon set so that the daemon set pod does the node registration on the same node it's registering, and it queries the metadata service on the node to do that, rather so that pretty much like bypasses the API calls, but then at the cost of running a daemon set, right? Like you're running, you know, the Kubernetes tax of more pods on a node. So we agreed, or at least I disagreed that we should, like that. I don't think we should just put this into core and assume that everyone has the same API quota problem. And so what I said was, let's accept the CAP as an Azure specific CAP, and let's get a sense of how many other providers have a similar problem. And if you find that like everyone would benefit from this and the trade-off of running the daemon set is worth it, then we can kind of adapt it into like the core cloud provider integration. So Pengfei did a demo. I'm not gonna like run the video, but I'm just gonna go through like some parts of the demo that show what it's doing, and then we can kind of just have a few minutes to discuss. Or like I just wanted to get a sense of whether if this solution resonates with any of the other providers, and if it does, then we can maybe have a follow-up discussion with Pengfei. And if not, then we can just keep things as is, as an Azure specific implementation, and then just move on. So yeah, this is just okay. So I'm just trying to find. Okay, one sec. Okay, so this is the spec he shows here. It's a new data set called Cloud Node Manager. So when you deploy out of Tree Azure, you pretty much deploy the Cloud Controller Manager, which is just one component like the Kube Controller Manager, but it would run on every control plane if you're running HA, and then you have your C-side driver for the storage support. But then if you with this change, you also deploy a data set called Cloud Node Manager, and like I said, it's just it's a really simple pod that checks if its current node is a node in the cluster, and if it's not, it queries the metadata service on the node, and then it registers. It knows how to talk to the API server, so it registers itself to the API server. So it pretty much initializes the node in 2 steps. The kubelet does kind of a node cloud provider registration, and then the Cloud Node Manager reinitializes the node with all the cloud provider details. And so, yeah, like what you end up getting is you get, the Cloud Controller Manager, and you get the Cloud Node Manager. Yeah, like that's pretty much it. Like, Craig, did you want to add anything to that?
I don't have anything to add. I think you got it right.
Okay. So I guess my question is, like, does that change resonate with anyone else? And do we think that it's a reasonable thing to consider, or should we just just have it as an option if you need it and move on?
I think that as long as we do not require cloud or enforce that cloud provider run this separately, and we can keep it optional, I think it might be something worth exploring. Like if we see that some other providers have quota issues for node registration.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm cool with that. Yeah, that works for me. Okay, cool. So I will, Craig, I will let Pengfei know that we're gonna use Azure as kind of the example provider for this if another provider wants it, but we're not gonna like prescribe it as a default.
I think also one of the things that could make it easier is maybe representing on the CPIs, the control loops that a provider should run, and this could be implemented by the provider. So like, let's say Azure wants to run, for example, on the CCM, the route controller, the service controller, but not the node controller one. It would return these, and this would simplify a bit the machinery to run the daemon set.
Yeah, I think Walter mentioned that too, like the other day. That could be useful. But like we also have component flags. Like we have a controllers flag that also does that. So we need to consolidate like how that's done. But yeah, that's a good point. We should consider doing that. Okay, cool. All right, there's no other questions. I wanted to do 118 grooming.
Yep.
But I want to do that at the very end of the meeting. So if there's other topics that we want to discuss, we should do that first.
Yeah. So, at this point, we've gone through all the agenda items, but I agree, like the one that we should probably leave till very last. If anyone else has any other topics they'd like to bring up, I am going to bring up one briefly, primarily for next time, but we know that when we take 121 and we take all of the cloud providers out of Tree, that we are going to be having to remove the E2E tests from pre-submit. I will point out that the last time I checked, there was still a considerable number of the E2E tests which only run on a small subset of cloud providers. So, you know, anything with the skip unless provider is. Generally, that provider is GCE, although there are cases where it may be AWS or others, or Azure. But what this means is that when we remove the in-tree cloud providers, the core testing that's going to happen on Kubernetes is going to drop noticeably. And so this is going to provide quality problems that we may want to work at how we're going to solve in the main line. B, it suggests that since they're no longer pre-submit, they're post-submit tests, they're going to run out of band. It's going to be much harder to identify which change actually caused the breakage. And we're going to need to think about how we set up policies around when a change breaks a cloud provider or several cloud providers or all the cloud providers. How do we find it? Under what conditions do we roll it back? And if we don't roll it back, who is responsible for fixing it? I don't necessarily want to have that conversation right now before people have had a chance to think about it, but I would like to sort of have people think about it and then let's discuss it next time.
So I'm confused as to why we have to make all the tests that depend on the provider check to be post-submit. So like my assumption is that as soon as the GC and the AWS providers are stable enough, we would just change the E2E test to deploy the out of tree setup. But then the framework check, like the test framework check that does like, oh, is the provider AWS GC? Like those can stay as is because those don't actually depend on, like that's just a flag in the testing framework, right? So.
I mean, we can see if maybe someone can come up with coordination, but my belief is that you're no longer dealing with one build. You have to do a build and then you have to publish something that then a second build picks up that published item, runs its own build, publishes, and then runs tests on. And that there's no way to really make that happen pre-submit, right? Because I don't think we want to publish images before the git submit has been accepted.
Could you like, is it reasonable to say like this is the version of the GC provider to use on master, unless otherwise like it would be part of like a prod config to say like use this version. This should be compatible with latest.
Well, I think the problem is we're talking about, you know, KK at this point is the kernel, and we're talking, and GCE or Azure or AWS's releases are distros. And so, I mean, it's a rough analogy, but it's like E2E test is a distro test, and you're trying to say, if I make this kernel change, before I make this kernel change, is this kernel change going to cause problems with the distro?
Right. So I guess what I'm saying is like we have E2E tests that are dependent on a provider, not necessarily because the provider offers we have tests that depend on a provider, but it is not necessarily based on the fact that it's a cloud provider feature. It's just the fact that like this cloud provider just has a certain trait that is dependent on this test. So like you can, there are a set of tests where they're useless if you don't have the cloud provider enabled, in which case those should be moved out of tree also. But the tests where there's a provider check, but you can still run it without the cloud provider actually enabled, I think those ones can stay as is, and it shouldn't depend, like as long as a working cloud provider is deployed on the cluster, it should be fine.
I mean, I guess I kind of agree, but it's the same problem. As an example, one of the tests I was looking at was aggregator. So aggregator is a beta API machinery feature that should in no way depend on GCE. Google engineers wrote the test. There were a couple of things that needed to be done to get it to work. It turns out there is one, or it does, it tests a slightly different configuration of Google, but in fact that test should work on everyone, on all cloud providers. But it takes a full cluster, and that test has never been enabled for anywhere other than GCE and GKE, right?
Right. So like for those tests, I guess what I'm saying is like the like PROW or our CI system can just deploy a GC or GK cluster that runs on the latest version of the out-of-tree provider that enables the cluster to run.
Well, but
and then
so hang on, before we get that far, how does it deploy? I mean, my problem is that first step, deploy. So we need to take the new KK kernel and plug it into the rest of the GKE setup.
Well, so that's what I meant is like the blocking thing, the blocker to all of that is having like a working out of tree GC thing that, and then someone goes into PROW and sets up a PROW job that deploys the Kubernetes cluster out of tree.
Yeah, but sorry, I'm not explaining myself well. So first I need a KK image, and then that KK image has to be built into and maybe we should just wait till everyone's sort of had some time to think about it. But I think we need to understand how we build these images, because my gotcha is that I don't believe we can build the GCE image until we've built the KK image, and we can't build the KK image until that commit occurs, which precludes this from running as a pre-commit.
Okay. Yeah, I'm wondering why the cloud provider, like the GC cloud provider, would depend on the KK build. But then I'm also assuming that at some point we have the cloud provider not depend on KK at all.
Well, I mean,
in which case that would.
So going back to my analogy, and I think maybe soon we should take this offline.
Yeah.
But from my analogy, if you think that the KK is the Linux kernel, it's sort of, I don't understand how Ubuntu or Fedora or Debian can make a latest build that doesn't build, that is supposed to consume the latest kernel without consuming the latest kernel.
Right. So maybe the analogy is not the best, because we're testing like, it's kind of like I want to test the kernel, and the easiest way for me to get a kernel is to run Ubuntu, right? Yeah. But I don't care about Ubuntu, like I don't care about everything Ubuntu adds. Just want to test the kernel. No, that's what I'm saying is like we can have a PROW job that deploys the latest version of Kubernetes, but on a stable version of the GC provider, right? But we're still testing the latest features of the Kubernetes cluster. But and just the GC bits deploy the whatever essentials to get the cluster working.
Agreed. I completely agree with that. My point is that today there are tests which, I mean, there's two scenarios that I think we need to think about. One, the one you're talking about, which probably applies to my sample case, which is there are tests that are run today cloud provider specific because of who wrote the test.
Right.
That probably shouldn't be cloud provider specific.
Right.
And
right.
unless a bunch of extra work gets done, when we remove the cloud provider specific code, that testing is going to disappear.
Gotcha. Okay.
The second is even if we get aggregator is actually a beautiful case in both cases. We should probably have an aggregator test in tree that is not cloud provider specific. That's missing. And then it turns out that the way routing gets done in aggregator for GCE is slightly different than how it works in any other cloud provider, which means that it is actually possible to make an aggregator change that breaks just GCE. Which that particular use case is definitely one where, you know, we're not going to know about that breakage. Today, we would know about that breakage when it happens. In the future, we aren't going to know about it until post-submit. So
Okay. So maybe we should add a backlog item that goes through every EDE test and prunes like what are the cloud provider dependencies.
Well, and I think we need to think of, I think we need to fully think about the various scenarios, because A, I agree there's exactly what you just said needs to happen, but B, we still need processes around what happens when the KK breaks a cloud provider and how we deal with that. And what if it's one, what if it's several, what if it's all of them?
Gotcha. Yeah, that's fair. That's a good point.
Cool. All right, sorry about that. Does anyone else have anything else they'd like to discuss? All right.
Walter, can you create a backlog ticket for that discussion?
Yes,
just so
I
we
will
have it in the milestone.
Yeah, I will take that as an action item. Thank you, Andrew. And if no one else has an additional one, do you want to take it away with the grooming?
Yes. All right. Okay. So this is just going oldest to latest. Reminder that P0 is highest priority item, and then P4 is lowest, and then we use the Kubernetes version as milestones. Okay. So this one was 4.117 last release, and this was done. So I'm just going to go ahead and close this. AWS docs. I know Nick had to drop off the call, so I will ping him after, or I'll just ping him here. I mentioned earlier that he's working on docs, so.
Can you also, since it's gone lifecycle stale, can we remove lifecycle stale and then freeze it?
Yes. Okay, I'll get back to you.
Awesome.
All right, DC docs. Any updates on this, Walter?
I'm having a hell of a time trying to find a doc writer for this.
Okay. Should we, okay. Well, I'll just keep pushing it until 4.118 then. Same with this one, actually. But I'm gonna keep it as P0. Okay. OpenStack docs. Do we still have anyone from OpenStack? Are there any docs being worked on? Okay, I will also push this. Better cloud load balancer names. I think this P3 is reasonable. And next, like this is a good thing. This is a nice thing to have, but it's a pretty thorny problem because you have to rename cloud LBs, and that sounds dangerous. But I think if someone wants to do the work, that's cool. But I don't think anyone's gonna prioritize this. So this is up for grabs. If anyone wants to work on it.
Oh, okay. Okay, so it does have SIG networking on it.
Yeah. So this is the cap we were talking about earlier for the migration. I think P0 and 118 is reasonable. Investigate usage / requirements for cluster ID. I'm missing context on this one. Oh, right. So you're right. So cluster ID feature is only used by AWS. So we asked Nick to investigate if we can just get rid of it. So I think P2 milestone next is fine. It's not super high priority. Credential provider, yeah, we already talked about this. 118 P0. API throttling and node controller. This was, I guess this is related to like Peng Fei's issue with like API quota sensitive controllers. I think Alibaba folks have the same problem. So maybe we can suggest the instance metadata issue to the Alibaba folks. But I think like P3 next is fine. Unless other folks have run into this, then we can maybe bump the priority on this and work on a I don't know, solution. But I'm gonna leave this as P3 for now. Same thing with routes controller. Finalize. Okay, so actually this was done. Let me close this. So just FYI on this one, there's an issue prior to 1.17 where if your controller manager crashes in the middle of deleting a service type load balancer, then essentially that load balancer gets orphaned in the cluster, and there's no way to clean it up unless you manually go in and delete it. And so that you know costs money to users. And so this added a finalizer to the service resource in the service controller, so that the service resource can never be deleted until this controller confirms that its load balancer was also deleted. So if you want this fixed, you need to go to 1.17 or 1.16 with the feature gate on. Okay, API server network proxy beta. It's 1.18. Wait, should I switch this to alpha?
No, beta.
Beta?
It's already alpha. Now we want to get it to beta.
Gotcha. Okay, investigate support for multiple route tables. Yeah, again, like this seems nice to have, but I don't think it's a super high priority for anyone. So I'm going to leave this P3 muscle next. And I'm also going to unassign myself because I'm not going to work on that. So if anyone wants to work on this, decoupling cloud providers from the EDU testing framework related to what we just talked about. But this is specifically pertaining to like the actual providers package in the framework, which does like some API calls. So yeah, there's some work going on for this, but it's again like high priority, but not like immediate for 1.18. But maybe we should consider putting this in a milestone, Walter. Do you want to put this 1.18, or do you want to wait until 1.19 or 1.20 to prioritize this higher?
I mean, I think as a P1, it's probably good to have it in 1.18. If it misses, I'm not going to be surprised. But at some point, this becomes a blocker for the 121 plans. So I don't want any surprises. So the sooner we work on it, the better.
Yeah. So like this, right? So it would mean our binaries don't have the cloud providers compiled in, but our vendor situation is the same. That's the outcome, right? So I guess, okay. How about we put it in 1.18, but we bump it to P2?
Okay, and then if it doesn't make it, we'll put it in 1.19 at P1, and then it goes into 1.20 at P0. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds good. And again, someone wants to work on this, feel free to sign themselves. Track underlying cloud resources for services. I think the Alibaba folks requested this one. Okay, I'm going to leave this as P2 next, unless anyone wants to. Okay. All right. CCM should be easier to consume. This is just part of getting rid of the. Right. So this was trying to get the CCM package into the cloud provider repo instead of KK. I think we try to work this to 1.18, but there's a recent comment.
Yeah, I think there are some PRs that are still waiting for reviews, and I think there are still 2 to file, so we can extract this.
Okay, so 118, and do you still want a P1 or
Mm,
do you think this is
well, given the situation is that it makes providers depend on Kubernetes, and it's not supported, I would still.
Yeah,
But
I think it either needs to be a P0 or a P1. We want to stop making changes to CCM if we're basically saying everyone needs to be out of tree, everyone's. I don't want to do this again in 119 when everyone's trying to get beta. I mean, we already have one alpha or one GA'd out of tree. Making changes to CCM is just going to cause headaches for everyone if we keep doing it.
So I think like so at least from the vSphere side of things, like if we moved CMD Cloud Controller Manager into like Cloud Provider / CMD Cloud Controller Manager, like it is a change that we have to fix, but I think that would make our Go modules file like much smaller, and I think we would all be happy to do that.
I agree with.
If it means you can't, if it means you don't have to import KK.
Totally agree with that, but I think part of this and I don't know when with the writing, I'm going off the title more than the bug text, but I think there are other things that need to be done as part of this. I think we've got to make the config easier. We should be making it easier to plug in new controllers, and I think by the time you've done that set of things, you're starting to look at a broader set of changes, and I'd rather, rip the Band-Aid off. Like if we can just make people do that set of changes once rather than metering them out and forcing people with every release to have to go back and make further changes.
Okay. There. Yeah, and like doing this would also mean you have to move all the controllers to staging repo, which that is probably harder. So P1 next then, or what are we?
I think I'm okay with P1. Just, I really would like this to actually happen in 118.
Okay. So you're saying you want it done before the change. Okay. So I think we're in agreement there. Like, I think it'd be good to prioritize this before everyone starts to. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's
So
P0.
should we couple this with extending the CPI to customize the controllers that you want to run? If you
And
want
I'm
to.
That's a separate issue.
We can, I think they're coordinated, but I'm working on a PR for that. I know you and I have chatted about it, Yassine.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think like this is one of those issues where more than one person can work on it because you can split the tasks out. So if anyone else wants to work on this with Yassine, reach out.
Yeah.
But does that seem reasonable, Yassine? P0 like.
Yeah.
118. Okay. Cool.
Like most of the work was done on 117, so for the extraction, for at least for the refactoring of the imports.
Cool. Yeah. I think here. I think like just doing this would be pretty reasonable. And then like move package controllers cloud to like, I think once you do that, like the dependency tree just becomes like really simple. I think that's it, right, Walter? Like, and then you just depend on like client Go and whatever else, and you shouldn't have to depend on KK at all.
The one tricky part that I think that's going to come into this is that, and I'm not sure that what the best place to talk about it is, but I think we're going to end up in a situation where the controllers that get brought in are going to be dependent on the cloud provider. And then So the controllers are going to depend on config. The cloud provider is going to depend on the controller, and the KCM is going to depend on the cloud provider, which means we're going to have to play some interesting games about splitting the config out from the the CCM.
Okay. All right. Well, but yeah, we'll let Yassine. We'll let Yassine deal with that.
Yeah, yeah,
but this is kind of like
for
the
the
end
second
game.
one. For the second one, I also like have PRs for it, so I'm mostly in need for reviewers.
Okay.
Yeah, please CC me on anything like that. I'm very interested, Yassine.
Okay.
Yeah, into metadata. I think we can close this. Like, this seems done. Handling volume scheduling when nodes are shut down. Update on this, Jason.
Yeah, for this one, it's still P2 next. I updated the cap, so it's mostly related to SIG storage now, plus some bit for cloud provider. So I assigned you Andrew for a review for this.
Okay, cool. Update cloud provider sample repo. I don't see Timo on the call, but I think this would be nice to have. Also for testing, like I'm realizing that if we can create a sample cloud provider that like can render the cloud provider data off a file, then you can test it with kind and all that stuff. But someone just needs to do the work. So I'm gonna unassign Timo though, because I'm not sure he's gonna work on it, but I will leave this open. Like this repo is actually like blank. So like if someone wants to just go ahead and like implement like a dummy cloud provider in here, and then we can use that as a reference for docs and stuff, like that'd be great. So just leave this. I'm gonna leave this as P2 though.
I actually liked your idea there, Andrew. It may be worth pinging Ben the Elder, since I know he does a lot of the kind work, and suggesting something like that to him.
Sure, I'll take a follow-up to do that. Okay, remove unnecessary flags in Cloud Controller Manager. Okay, so this fell off my radar. I need to follow with Timo, but I will bump this to 118 and leave it at P2. Cloud Control Manager should be able to ignore nodes. Yeah, this was a feature request from the virtual kubelet folks. Doesn't seem super important, so I think P2 is fine. P2 with next milestone is fine. Unless, does anyone want this feature? Okay. Standardize the CCM build release process. Context here. Yassine, I think you were on this.
So for this one, we started having discussions, but I feel like we're missing like some context on what we want to achieve with this one. So I'd like to put it on our next SIG meeting agenda to discuss it, like dedicate some time from the meeting to discuss it.
Sure. Do you want to go ahead and just add it to the agenda?
If I can, I'm wondering if it would make more sense to send this to the extraction working group for that discussion.
Yeah, that makes sense too. So I'll take an action item to add it to the agenda.
Okay. Allow discovering node changes for load balancer targets more frequently. This is a SIG network, SIG cloud provider thing, but last time I checked the service controller, it doesn't actually do a backend update for nodes, and in a load balancer, when there's a node update, it just pulls every 100 seconds. And as you can imagine, that can cause problems. So I think there was actually, I think I opened a PR. Yeah, there's actually a PR here to add a node event handler. Right, but then there's some concerns around like, because nodes get updates frequently, like it could cost a lot of API calls to update a node backend frequently. So there needs to be some discussion here, but.
I think that may have gotten a little better. I think when this was originally being discussed, Heartbeat was part of Node. And while I think in legacy mode it still is, the latest versions of the code, I believe Heartbeat has been moved out to actually a lock resource.
Yeah, it's using the list API.
So I think
Cool.
that will
All
have significantly cut down on the rate of node change.
All right, so I'm gonna unassign myself to this one. But if someone wants to like look at my PR and maybe do a follow-up, and then I'll bump this to an 18. But if someone wants to work on this, I can review the PR and get it in. All right, deprecate and remove the CCM binary. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that is what it is. I'm not sure we need to like, well, there's nothing really stopping us from, actually, this is just part of like the refactor to move it to the cloud provider repo. I think this issue is actually redundant. I'm not sure we need this, but I will clean it up later. Okay, we're almost at the end. We're out of time, so I'm gonna be quick. Should limit load balancing rules, resource name length less than 80 characters long.
So definitely think we need to get networking in on this one.
Yes. Okay.
And I'm afraid I am getting kicked out of my room.
Okay, bye. I'll just wrap up with the last one and then end the call. All right, I'll follow up on this one and then document migration steps to CCM. I will also bump this priority P1, and I can take this one actually, or I can ask if Gregor wants to take it, but I will follow up. Cool, that was it.
All right, thanks everyone. That should conclude our SIG Cloud Provider update.
Bye, folks.
Bye. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.